Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Betfair's AFL Trade Talk. It was another big weekend of footy. It started on Thursday night with the Lions smashing Richmond, who were starting to turn a corner with their new coach, 𝗪𝗛𝗪𝗏𝗧. But Daz, what was your highlight for the weekend?
Yeah, I think it's probably got to be Dan Houston. That was a great game.
Goal.
Yeah, that was a great game of
Incredible.
footy. And we very rarely recognise set shots in goal of the year, but you've got to factor in pressure. He's right on the edge of his distance. Obviously fatigue. He had 30 touches and probably run 15K. Game's on the line. And straight away, as soon as he took the mark, he just put the hand up and said, I'm taking this. He wasn't looking around thinking, I've got to hit someone up short because I'm on the edge of my range. He just backed himself in. Obviously, he had to kick at 52. He's kicked at 52 and 7 centimetres and just got it over the line. And obviously, a painful loss for the Bombers, but a tremendous game of footy. And Port Adelaide's character test stands up again.
I know that they use a lot of footies around the ground. They're always changing them over. But in conditions like that, that ball would have been like a lead balloon.
Oh,
it would have been so tough to kick, let alone kick it over 60, almost 60 metres. What an absolute incredible goal. I echo your sentiments about that being a contender for goal of the year. It doesn't beat Jack Nunes' over at Optus Oval.
Or even Jamie Elliott last year against Essendon as well. Very similar. Obviously, he was at the other end of the ground and probably a little bit, certainly a tighter angle. But obviously the circumstances in terms of what it means for both clubs, Port Adelaide and Essendon, that was massive.
Well, I'm sure that's my bias talking about Jack Nunes. And then the draw, Friday night football. Did the Swans let one slip against
Absolutely.
Geelong?
Yeah, they I think early, certainly, they should have been well clear at half-time. Then Geelong would probably feel when they got a couple of goals up that they should have hung on. But Sydney had so many chances to win the game late. The one where Fox obviously turns his opponent inside out, hits the post from 7 or 8 metres out. Tom Hickey missed 2 set shots from within 20 metres out directly in front. And they showed the reaction of the injured Swans. Buddy up in the box, just couldn't believe it. He, head up, mouth a gasp at some of those misses. And yeah, out of a draw, it's probably a unique game. Out of a draw, I always think one side feels a little bit better than the other. One side feels like, oh, we've pinched that. And the other side feels, oh, we've let that slip. I reckon both of them would feel pretty flat after that, given the amount of mistakes that were made.
Yeah, I think you're right. 6 goals and 18 points scored for the Swans. Yeah, probably just those chances gone begging for the Swans probably gets them to miss out on a pretty crucial game in the scheme of their season. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the Swans respond this week. We're going across North Melbourne, sort of have been in okay form, but they lost to Adelaide at 66 at their home ground. Other results, the Dogs beat Freo. Their woes continue. The Pies absolutely smashed the Suns at their home ground.
Yeah, and it feels like there's a fallout from the Gold Coast if we're believing all of the media reports. Maybe not immediately, but perhaps soon in terms of 𝗪𝗪𝗪 and what it means for his future, which is unfortunate. We might touch on that a little bit later on. But yeah, Collingwood, I think, underlining that they're still the team to beat. I know Port Adelaide haven't lost since round 3, but yeah, Collingwood, I still think are the ones that are going to have it taken from them.
Yeah, frustratingly, we were talking about Gold Coast a couple of weeks ago and highlighting how great their progression has been, and we were highlighting some of their players that have stood up. Obviously, they've got Tuke Miller out, they've had some injuries, but they've managed to win some pretty big games on their home deck and away from home, obviously beating a couple of big sides. But what do you put that down to in terms of it can't just be coaching? I think it's got to be a club issue, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a bit more to that, whether it's recruiting, player retention and things like that. Look, they're 7 and 8, so it's not a disastrous position. But if you look at their year, they beat Geelong at home. They lost to Melbourne by 5 points and had a shot pretty much on the siren to draw that game and missed. They had wins in Darwin against Adelaide and the Bulldogs that were good victories. They beat Richmond in Melbourne, but in and around that, obviously, they got belted at home by Sydney, belted by Collingwood. They got flogged by Carlton at the MCG. Just that consistency has hurt them a little bit. They're nowhere near the worst team in the competition, but they're probably on the basis of last year. Maybe they haven't stepped forward to the level, but I'm not sure that, they've done it with Rodney Eade and with Guy McKenna and so many times previously that they go too early, I think, on a coach call. And I get the feeling, there's one obvious reason, the mentor, if you will, the ex-Richmond coach, Damien Hardwick, who's the free agent in the market, if you will. And I sense that's part of the strategy. But yeah, I'm not sure it's the right way to go.
My issue is don't sack 𝗪𝗏𝗪𝗠𝗪, like just make it obvious that you're hiring a triple premiership coach.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I don't think there's much more that any coach in the AFL can do for the Suns. 𝗪𝗏𝗪𝗠𝗪's has done actually a fantastic job, and he's developed a lot of their players, and I think that's a key indicator of a good coach when he can improve players. But you gotta remember, they're just losing everyone, back to back. Not sure how their facilities have gone up there, but I've, from other codes of sport, Gold Coast facilities always get mentioned in the media as not very good. It's a money issue. I know the AFL pours a lot of money into them, but can we just take a step back and say, look, they lost to Collingwood, by 17 points, but they're the firm flag favourites. They've only lost 2 games this year. They've got basically a full strength list. I think everyone's just got to settle down on how bad the Suns are. And if you're trying to mount a case to sack 𝗪𝗏𝗪𝗠 because you want 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗏 to come in, don't make it because 𝗪𝗏𝗪𝗠's bad at his job. Just make it because you want to get a triple premiership coach. I think that's really important.
And it feels also like, this wouldn't have happened on Saturday night, Sunday morning. Their eyes would have been on that for a while. If they had lost to Collingwood by 15 points, would this conversation have not happened? I sense it was already in the pipeline, and it feels like they're closer to stability than they've really ever been, the Gold Coast. Like they're a middle of the table side that could potentially, with some recruits, push up and play finals. They're not quite going to get there this year. But they're not the side from the early days of the comp that couldn't win a game and were always in the bottom 4. They're going to win 10 to 12 games a season. And I feel like they've got a base that if they just settle things down, we saw Richmond hold their line at the end of 2016 and it worked. Collingwood held their line at the end of 2017 and it worked. They made a grand final the following year. Geelong, classic example, 15 years ago when they could have sacked Bomber Thompson. I think sometimes clubs blink too early, and the Gold Coast probably haven't learnt that that's not a good idea yet.
I think you're absolutely spot on there, Daz. We'll definitely touch on the Gold Coast in the coming minutes of the show and future shows because they're an interesting prospect. But I quite like the Gold Coast. I like the way they're heading. Carlton's win streak of 2 continues.
Both by 10 goals.
There was an exciting game up at Alice Springs where the Giants pipped Melbourne, and West Coast Eagles were actually winning against the Saints in the third quarter, and the Saints just got by on coming back from behind, and they won by 8 points.
Yeah, the dog got an extra walk on Sunday because I had to leave the house at half time just to get a little bit of air and catch my breath. That was a very frustrating watch, but they got home, the Saints, and it was valuable 4 points for them. But look, for the Eagles, on one hand, it's a positive in that they put the best foot forward, and they haven't done that for a while, and they were ultra competitive. But on the other hand, it's probably a negative because that's the level that they need to get to all the time, and they haven't produced anywhere near that. So, on one hand, it's, I guess, kind of a backhanded compliment. It's like, well done for bringing it, but you should be doing that all the time.
That's right. I think to actually lose that game by only 8 points shows that it was a great coaching performance from Adam Simpson. Daz, we've been doing our Betfair deep dives the last couple of weeks, and we were trying to decide what to deep dive on this week. But you and I just are astounded by the talent of the young rising stars in the competition. So we thought we'd talk about some of the young guns around the comp and who's in line for the Rising Star Award this year. Daz, you kick it off. Tell us who are the big contenders.
Well, all the rage has been Will Ashcroft versus Harry Sheezel. Over the course of the year, Mitch Owens has slowly crept into that market. So it's been Ashcroft and Sheezel around the $2 to $3 mark all year. Owens was 70s at the start of the season and then still double figures, then into 9, into 7, and now roughly 5.20. Jai Amos is the other bolter from Fremantle. We'll go through the numbers. They're probably the 4 leading contenders. So Ashcroft is favourite. Played every game in a midfield that's one of the best in the competition, in a top 4 side, averaging 22.47 disposals a game, 8.3 contested, so he's winning a lot of contested ball for a kid, 3.5 clearances a game, 3.5 tackles a game. He's kicked 7 goals. One of them was the goal of the year if Houston doesn't get it. Can't have done much more. Harry Sheezel played every game in a team that's struggling, averaging 27 possessions, and I guess the knock on him is that he plays in a position where he can get a lot of easy ball, but he's still averaging 7.67 contested, which is only 1 less than Will Ashcroft. He ranks 5th in the AFL for uncontested ball, number 1 at North for total disposals, 3rd at North for contested, and 5th for tackles, so putting together a great season.
Let's talk about Harry Sheezel a little bit and just dive into him. So Obviously, North are struggling this year, and he's been an absolute shining light. What has it been about 𝗪𝗺𝗪𝗂𝗧𝗧 game that you've really enjoyed watching?
His game awareness. I was watching highlights earlier of round 2 when they beat 𝗵𝗺𝗪𝗓, and there was a ball on the line. This is his second game of AFL footy. North led by a point with 15 seconds to go. 𝗵𝗺𝗪𝗓 tried to force a ball through for a point. Defence is under pressure. Normally you might rush it behind. He socketed the ball along the line just to keep it in play, thinking that I understand we're risking a goal here, but if I concede a point, we don't win. And he just had the game awareness under extreme pressure to do that. And he's just been a smart player that's been able to move all over the ground. I caught a bit of him in the NAB League last year, and he was almost exclusively a forward. Like he played like Stevie J, like a mercurial forward. Almost spent no time in the midfield. So I think his ability to transition into a high possession player in a first year is outstanding, particularly in a team that obviously isn't winning many games.
Just shows his willingness to learn. And I think a game that I watched him, obviously predominantly played across half back and obviously won a lot of football. He got moved to that half forward position, and that's interesting insight. I didn't know that he was a half forward playing in the NAB League, but he got moved across half forward and then also into the midfield, but still managed to sustain his high touches on the footy. I think for a young player, his awareness, as you say, and his ability to just be cool, calm and collected under pressure has been absolutely outstanding. But one that we both really like is also Mitch Owens.
I think for Mitch, I think it's fair to say that of all the players in contention, he's playing the hardest role. He's playing centre-half forward as a 19-year-old, pinch hitting in the ruck. He's had 209 disposals, but 133 of them contested. So that's the most of all of the Rising Star contenders, and it's nearly 2/3 of his possessions are contested. He averages 8.3 a game. He's kicked 19 goals, having missed a game and a half with concussion, so half the Giants game, and then missed another one. And just to look at some of the champion data information around him, Daniel Hoyne does a bit of a spot on radio, and he said that his ability to win the contest in general play is rated at the same level as Nat Fyfe and Gary Ablett Jr. in their Brownlow years.
Wow.
He also said that he should be considered in the All-Australian squad based on data, and he's performing at 84% above expectation for age and position. So I think the factor for Owens, the numbers are going to read probably slightly more impressively for the others. I think it's the degree of difficulty in the role that he's playing. And I get the feeling a lot of the experts, being ex-players, will see it that way. And Jai Amos, worth a mention, going to give a shout out to Tom Happel as well, who when he wrote the 𝗵𝗺𝗪𝗓 preview said that Amos was the breakout star for 𝗵𝗺𝗪𝗓, having only played, I think, 2 games last year. He's kicked 29 goals, 8 in 14 matches. Leading goal kicker at 𝗵𝗺𝗪𝗓 at 19. He's kicked multiple goals 9 times, kicking at 77% accuracy. He's probably going to kick 45 goals for the year as a kid. So, I think Jai Amos in any other year would have won the Rising Star if not for that crop.
Well, I think any of those players in any other year would have easily won the Rising Star, but that's what makes it such an exciting market to look at on the exchange. Let's have a quick look at the Rising Star market. So Will Ashcroft is up the top there at $2.04. Harry Sheezel follows at $3.35. Mitch Owens at $5.50 and Jai Amos is $8.60. Look, there's certainly some honourable mentions that are lower in the market. George Wardlaw, Bailey Humphrey, Finn Callaghan, Max McElhaney. I'm really keen to talk about a couple of them. I'm going to start with Max McElhaney. He's a father-son, obviously, from Adelaide. He's just inked a 2-year deal. He's one of those players that is not one of the sexy players that is going to win a Brownlow, but he's going to win you a premiership. And that's why I really believe that these players should get shouted out. He's had so many big jobs on some of the leading small forwards at other clubs this year. A couple of the players that he's beaten, James Peatling, he kept him to 4 disposals, zero goals. Shai Bolton, 5 disposals, 1 goal. Junior Rioli, 5 disposals, no goals. Michael Walters, 5 disposals, no goals. And a couple others. Luke Bruce, 4 disposals, no goals. And Jamie Elliott, 9 disposals and no goals. That is incredible for a young player, first-year player in the AFL. He's one that really excites me, and there's no wonder that Adelaide are going so well and they're looking finals bound after some really bad years in the competition. He's just having a fantastic season. What do you think about him?
Yeah, three of those small forwards, Walters, Breust and Elliott, have played the position as well as anyone in the last few years. Great effort. And Bolton, obviously, is a mercurial midfield forward to shut him down. Tremendous effort. I mean, Jamie Elliott, he spent 3 quarters on him and obviously kept him goalless. Walters has kicked 25, 26 for Fremantle. Excellent record against those players. Obviously, Motlop as well, barely touched it. So, tremendous lockdown role again for a kid on players. That all of them would be more mature bodies, more experienced players, and he's able to cover them, which is terrific.
Absolutely. The other one I want to talk about is GWS's Finn Callaghan. He was an early draft pick in 2021. He's just locked in a 2-year deal himself. He is a 192 centimetre wingman. Like, it is crazy just how the game is changing and really pushing towards those tall, lopey players that can obviously play multiple positions. He's a left footer. I want to talk about GWS's improvement over their last 5 weeks. They've won 4 games, lost 1. They're obviously going great guns under their new coach, Adam Kingsley. Look, he's had 19 tackles in the last 5 games. In his previous 10, he only had 6. So it just shows his intent to continue to get into the contest and be physical with the game. He's also averaged 5 inside 50s per game in his last 5 games. And before that, he'd only averaged 3 in his last 10. So it's no wonder that GWS have won 4 of their last 5 games. And once again, I thought he was incredible on the weekend. He's not blowing out games, getting 3 votes, but he is being a really solid contributor, and I love watching him play.
Yeah, their only loss in the last 5 was by a kick to Richmond, pretty much on the siren. They've beaten 4 of last year's finalists. They beat Geelong at Kardinia Park, beat Melbourne away at a tricky venue like Alice Springs. They've beaten Sydney as well, beat Fremantle by 12 goals a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, he's another one I had the pleasure of calling in the NAB League and was an elite talent. Had a few injuries last year, but really coming into his own now and tackling for someone that young and obviously putting the ball inside 50 and using run and carry. He was a guy that a lot of clubs had a very, very keen eye on in his draft year and obviously got through to the Giants, and hopefully they can hang on to him as well.
100%. Daz, you've also got Bailey Humphrey. He looks like he's going to be a special player. He's a goal-kicking midfielder, so valuable. And George Wardlaw, he came into the North team a little bit later, but he's averaged 6 tackles per game. He's tough as hell. What I've enjoyed about him is his footwork is incredible. He's a real thinker, calm under pressure, and he's willing to put his head down and make sure he hits a target. So George Wardlaw, I think, could potentially be, out of everyone, the most exciting player, in my opinion. And I'm looking forward to seeing him develop over the next couple of years. Daz, any other shout-outs you wanted to mention? Rising stars, there's so many. I've got a massive list in front of me.
Glad Wardlaw got the mention. Van Rooyen, I think, has been pretty good at Melbourne. I know he just went out of the side. Pedlar's kicking a lot of goals as well.
Just signed a new contract as well.
So it's a really good crop. But I think certainly Ashcroft, Sheezel, Owens and Jai Amos, somewhat unlucky that they'd be an absolute lock without the others in that group. So, fascinating to see what happens. Obviously, we've got another 8 games of the season for someone to break away. Or, I mean, if Jai Amos, propels Fremantle into the finals, or Mitch Owens propels St Kilda into the finals, maybe that's enough for them.
As players like Patrick Dangerfield and others, get to the twilight of their career and they're, seeing retirement a lot closer than obviously the start of their careers, it's good to see the next generation of player come through. So, exciting times ahead for the AFL and fans of footy. All right, let's talk about the Trade Talk medal. In the votes this week, I'm going to let you go with the honourable mentions for the Trade Talk medal.
Speaking of next generation, Jamarra Ugle-Hagan was an early pick. He was excellent for the Bulldogs. Hugh McCluggage, we were debating, who was the best player on the ground for Brisbane on Thursday night, and he was right up there. Adam Cerra, I was at the G on Sunday for Carlton's clash with Hawthorn, and he dominated proceedings. Isaac Rankin kicked 5 for Adelaide, and Josh Kelly really pivotal in the Giants getting over the line against the D's. So I give them all honourable mention.
And obviously kicked that winning goal from about 60, on a pretty tough angle. But the votes on one vote, you're going to give it to Dan Houston, who kicks the winning goal. I think that's fair enough.
Gets 10 coaches' votes as well. Had 32 possessions.
2 votes, Lachie Neale. His Brownlow credentials are really coming to the fore at the moment. He's predicted votes in his last few games, which looking forward to having a chat about that in the Brownlow segment. But 3 votes, 𝗥𝗘𝗽𝗃𝗧, the young fella from Collingwood that everyone loves so much. Favourite for the Brownlow medal. Why have you given 𝗥𝗘𝗽𝗃𝗧?
Yeah, I thought, when the game wasn't up for grabs for long because Collingwood blew it away, but he was dynamic early on in the piece and just kept on going. And, the key, I think, for him was he'd started the year so well and then probably had a 6 or 7 week period where teams had started to lock down on him a bit. He was still playing well, but he's now sort of shaking free of that, starting to dominate again, which is a clear sign of a great player.
That's right. Obviously a sign that teams need to start putting some more attention into 𝗥𝗘𝗃𝗧. Let's talk about the Betfair exchange and the market watchdog. And Daz, what's caught your eye on the exchange this week?
So that Coleman race, clear breakaway now, Taylor Walker and Charlie Curnow. Curnow kicked, I think, 3 for Carlton on Sunday. Tex kicked 3, missed a few, so could have kicked 5 or 6 against North. We mentioned Owens moving in terms of the rising star. And I know we're going to get into this segment shortly, but the premiership market and around the ladder predictor market has had some really dramatic swings. And of course the Brownlow too, which we were touching on.
Fantastic, Daz. Well, we're going to continue on and we're actually going to get into our predictions segments. And it's been a massive Brownlow movement over the last few weeks. And Daz, take us through your thoughts on the Brownlow predictor.
Yeah, so Lachie Neale, he's been our big focus. He went from 23s into 14s on Thursday night with that best on ground performance, a likely 3 votes. I was curious when I was watching 𝗥𝗘𝗃𝗧 carve it up on Saturday as to whether that would do anything to Lachie's odds again, whether he would ease. Only a fraction out to 14.50, but I still think it's overs. Obviously, he's shortened quite a bit, which we thought he might. And you flagged the Taranto versus Neale. Taranto's drifted out a bit to 8.80. It was about $6 last week. So they have gone closer to parity. Daicos himself has moved into 2.80. And Bontempelli, really curious on him. His odds didn't move as much as I thought they would, given he'll probably get the 3. He's still at about 8.80, so getting nearly double figures on Bontempelli. So as much as it's getting increasingly difficult to see Daicos not win, I still think there's a lot of value in Lachie Neale, Christian Petrarca and Marcus Bontempelli.
Christian Petrarca didn't get a predicted vote on the Betfair Brownlow predictor, but he's probably one I'd give a vote for Melbourne's game against GWS on the weekend. I think Jack Viney was the clear standout. He gets 3 votes, but in the battle for 2 and 1, Melbourne were leading for most of that game, so it wouldn't surprise me if Melbourne had another player in the votes there, and if it was going to be anyone, it's got to be Christian Petrarca. So what do you think about that, Dad?
Yeah, and I think even the week before he was listed as 1 against Geelong. He was pretty close to BOG in a narrow loss in that game. I think obviously Gary Rowan might get the votes, but yeah, I still think there's a chance. A couple of times this year he's sort of got 2s and 1s on the predictor when he's a legitimate chance to get 3. So that does make him slightly over the odds.
As soon as the show finished last week, I really regretted not laying Tim Taranto for the Brownlow medal because I felt like it was almost as obvious as can be that he was going to be as short as possible at that point to win the Brownlow medal, because something that we really need to keep an eye on is the teams or the player profiles with teams that haven't won that many games. And if Richmond aren't going to be going that well, then you'd have to say that Tim Taranto's chances at getting votes is going to be less, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And probably the other one at the other end of the spectrum is Jordan Dawson at the Crows, because the Crows, when they're not just winning at home, they're generally winning convincingly. So they're going to get all of the votes in most of those games. And if you look at the predictor for Dawson, there's a lot of 2, 1.5, 2, 2, 2.5, 2. You just need to have umpires give him 3 in a couple of those, which is every chance. And his prediction of 18 becomes 21. And all of a sudden, instead of being 13s, he'd be 5s, 6s. So he's another one to probably look at, given Adelaide, keep winning convincingly at home.
The last one I want to talk about is Zach Butters, who's still 660 on the Betfair exchange, but he finds himself a good 7.5 votes behind 𝗥𝗘𝗃𝗧 leading on the Brownlow predictor. But he's still so short. He was a hype player a few weeks ago, and he almost got into favourite at one point, and that saw 𝗥𝗘𝗃𝗧 seriously drift. What do you do with Zach Butters? I mean, he's way too short to back at this point, considering the predicted vote. Yeah,
so he's listed at 660. The prediction has Dawson with 1 more vote at 13 and Bontempelli with potentially 2 more votes at nearly 9. So even Petrarca, maybe 3 votes ahead of him, is longer in the odds. Lachie Neale, as we said, at 14.50, could be 3-4 votes ahead of him. So again, with Butters, he had that really hot streak where he could have conceivably got 13 votes in 6 games or something like that. But yeah, I think now he's probably a little bit too short, given, you know, he'd be coming out of nowhere to win a Brownlow. It sounds funny, but often a player needs to have, you know, a couple of seasons, if that makes sense, before they start really getting noticing. I know he's been a good player, but not a Brownlow contender until now.
All right, Daz, let's head over to buy, hold and sell. And you're going to do most of the work this week. Who are you buying right now?
I'm buying Jeremy Cameron only because...
I've done that a few times this year.
I'm doing that only because obviously he hasn't played for a couple of weeks, so the odds have blown out in terms of the Coleman. He's currently 12.50. The gap isn't that substantial. Geelong plays North Melbourne. He's obviously coming off a concussion. He was probably still able to train. It's just purely speculative. If he kicks 6 at 𝗪𝗏𝗧 Park, hypothetically, then you probably halve that price. So I did the similar with Toby Green last week on the price, and I've done it with Danaher on the price. And I reckon Jeremy Cameron just have a little nibble this week.
I completely agree. Daz, I'm going to do the exact same. So we got the same one there by Jeremy Cameron. Who are you holding on this week?
It was the same as last week. I held the Dogs for the top 8 because I thought they were favourites to beat Fremantle and a win wouldn't move their market that much, and it didn't. They play Collingwood this week. So if you do the ladder predictor, the Bulldogs draw is not too bad, but this is a game that people might tip them to lose. So if they do lose it, I don't think it changes too much. I still think that the draw is quite favourable for them after that. So if they're $1.37 or $1.40, I think they are for the 8 right now, assuming, it's a big assumption, but assuming they get beaten by Collingwood, you'll probably get a slightly better price on them, but the circumstance doesn't actually change. So I'll just be waiting on the Dogs, because if you think they're going to make the 8, back them next week, not this week.
Yeah, great shout. And that's what Betfair exchange punters do. Obviously, take into consideration those predictions and how the market moves off the back of them. We spoke about this earlier in the show. You're selling the Suns potentially sacking 𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗏.
I think sometimes teams blink. They've just got to hold their nerve a little bit. And I understand exactly. I understand the spectre of Damien Hardwick looming, and look, who knows, if he wants the role, he might. But yeah, I just think the Gold Coast have got a few bigger issues than 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏, and I think he's actually done a pretty reasonable job.
I've got a good question for you at the end of the show in our back or lay questions. We're going to get to that soon, but what are your betting strategies for this week, Daz?
Well, on the ladder predictor, Melbourne had been the clear favourite for a long time, but not anymore. They've actually dropped from about 350 on the predictor to 860. And Collingwood, for the first time really all year, are over the odds based on the predictor. The predictor has them at $2.40. They're 360 at the moment. So I think Collingwood can't be a lock to make the grand final, but they are raging favourite to make the grand final. And I think they're going to play either Port Adelaide or Brisbane in a grand final. And I think they'd be pretty short, certainly against Brisbane. And look, Port are doing everything right, but obviously the MCG factor is in that. So I think 365 on Collingwood, given I think they'll make the grand final. And if they make the grand final, they'll be $1.40. I'd be taking Collingwood now for the flag.
Yeah, I think there's plenty that you can do. Plenty of markets on the Betfair exchanges. Obviously, the minor premiership, which we had a look at a few weeks ago, they've shortened a fair bit. And then imagine what would have happened if Port lost that game against Essendon on the weekend. But there's also to reach the grand final and premiership. So, I'd be looking to back Collingwood in all of those. And you're getting a major price advantage on the Betfair exchange.
Yeah, and the other one, just in that similar sort of frame, is we spoke of Melbourne just then. Now, Melbourne play St Kilda this week, and I think Melbourne will probably win. I think the market's about right in their favourites, but they won't definitely win. And we've spoken a lot about the top 4, where Collingwood, Port, Brisbane unbackable, but then Melbourne are $1.54 to finish top 4. Everyone else is 7s, 8s and beyonds. They're level on wins with St Kilda, who they play this week, at $11. So if Melbourne $1.54, St Kilda are $11. If St Kilda beat Melbourne this week, they take their place in the top 4. And then, similar to what I was saying before, I still think Melbourne would be more likely to get back on top and finish top 4. So I reckon lay Melbourne for top 4 now, maybe have a little nibble at some of those others like Adelaide or whoever it may be, and then maybe back Melbourne if they happen to lose this week's game.
Spot on. They're very short. And I've just got this Collingwood confidence. Like, if they go into a game against GWS, you've just got, from basically an eye test, I mean, they've obviously only lost a couple of games for the year, but you've got this Collingwood confidence. You know that they're going to win that game. And if they lose, they lose. Okay, that's fine. But you just feel that confidence in those good teams. Yeah. I don't have that Melbourne confidence. Like, I didn't see them going to Alice Springs against GWS and just winning that game, which, if they're going to be a proper flag contender, you should probably have that confidence, right?
Yeah, and they can't score at the moment. I think they've averaged 8 goals in their last 5 games. Their defence is phenomenal. Midfield really deep. Still think they're amongst the best few sides in the comp. It's just not quite clicking for them. And as a Saints fan, hopefully they wait one more week.
Yep, spot on, Daz. All right, we're going to go to our back or lay questions. This is one I'm super keen to ask you because you've had an opinion for the whole show. We've been speaking about it. It's obviously been in the news. It's a really left field interesting one, but can 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏 and 𝗫𝗏𝗃 both be at the Suns together next year?
Probably not if 𝗫𝗏𝗃 isn't coach. I think they wouldn't be able to keep him around, I think, in another capacity. So it would really come down to whether if Damien Hardwick doesn't want to coach again, he wanted to take the break from Richmond, he might want to take that senior mentoring role like Rodney Eade had at Collingwood a few years ago. That's the only way it could work, but then it depends on how would 𝗫𝗏𝗃 feel having a senior person, over the shoulder all the time. So history says no. But it comes down to the maturity of the individuals. But going on history, no, probably not.
It's just such an interesting conversation because if I'm Carlton and I see that 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏 has come onto the scene, I'm not going to go and pile more pressure on Michael Voss to try and change the whole football department to sack a coach. But if I see him become a free agent, whether he's the head coach or not, I will want to try find a place for him in my football department.
Yeah.
And I just don't think it's a culture that we're necessarily used to. I mean, it obviously becomes a little bit more appropriate when a coach gets sacked and then he goes to a different club and then becomes a senior assistant or something like that. Obviously, I don't envisage 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏 becoming a senior assistant somewhere else when he's such a well-credentialed coach. However, I think that there has to be a role within an organisation for a club like Gold Coast where they can have 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏 in there in a senior role, maybe not spending so much time in the football department coaching, maybe looking from afar in a more management role, and then you've got 𝗫𝗏𝗃 calling the shots and then obviously direct reporting in to 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏. There's got to be something that they can do there.
And we've got to remember that Dimmer cited burnout. So if you've cited burnout, you want to jump straight into the hot seat again. It might be ideal for him to be the mentor or the second fiddle in that scenario where the buck doesn't absolutely stop with you.
100%. What's your question for me, Daz?
So we've spoken a lot about Carlton and their season. Obviously, they've won the last couple to get back onto somewhere near parity at 6-8-1. But Carlton, Richmond and Sydney, all 3 of them tipped in many circles to contest for finals. All 3 of them have the same win-loss record now, 6 wins, 8 losses, 1 draw. So who of the 3 has been the most disappointing and who has the most upside?
That is such a hard question, Daz. I'm going to have to say, I still think Sydney's an incredible outfit. They're such a young side. They made the grand final last year. I think some of their younger players that are up and coming, that are below the age of 22, 23 are really exciting. Carlton have that. It's just that they carry this weight of pressure that Sydney don't need to feel in New South Wales. Richmond, the other one, I'm not sure where they've got their pressure just yet. I'm sure it will mount in the next couple of years if they continue to perform badly. But right now, given Richmond's success over their last 5-6 years, they've obviously won a few flags. It's hard because at the start of the year, I was saying that Richmond was probably going to go on and win the grand final.
Yeah.
I was very keen on them. I thought the acquisition of Hopper and Taranto was so good, and they got them for basically nothing, in my opinion. I still think that those 2 players are going to be exceptional players for that football club over the next 10 years. In order, I'd probably have to say Sydney number 1, Carlton number 2, Richmond number 3.
Yep, I think that's probably right based on age profile.
All right, Daz, what a big show of AFL trade talk. That's all we got time for, but make sure you head to the Betfair Hub for all our trading tips and to recap the full show.
What's gambling really costing you? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.